Welcome to the Cold Case Christianity broadcast, the only Christian case-making program hosted by a cold case homicide detective. J. Warner Wallace has been investigating cold case murders in Los Angeles County for over a decade. His work has been featured on Fox News, Court TV, and Dateline. For more information about Jim's work and the case for Christianity, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. Now, here's your host, J. Warner Wallace.
Thanks for joining us at Cold Case Christianity. I am J. Warner Wallace. Here in Season 6 of our show on NRB TV, we've been talking about young people. Now, most of the time I worked as an investigator, especially those years I was working cold cases. I was also bivocational as a pastor. And most of my audiences, even today, are young people. Gen Z, we typically think of between 3 and 20. They're usually, if you've got a high schooler or a junior higher in your life, anywhere in your life. Maybe you're a parent of a junior higher or a high schooler. Maybe you're a youth pastor. Maybe you're a Christian educator. Maybe you're just a member of a church. And you look across the aisle, there's somebody sitting over there who's a high schooler. And you're thinking to yourself, boy, Christianity seems to be on the decline in America. Well, why do you think it's declining? It's declining amongst that age demographic. That's by far the demographic, young people, that are more likely and are documented as leaving the church. If we care about the future of the church, we ought to care about the future of young people and make them our target audience. So I want to give you today some tips for teaching Christian truth to Gen Z. Again, it could just be that at some point you may be sharing the gospel with someone who's younger. And how do you do that? Or you're raising your own kids, or you're involved in youth ministry. And by the way, I typically say that if you want to get involved in your church quickly, and you want to become a good Christian case maker, ask the youth pastor if he or she could use some help. The youth minister, the youth leader, even the youth coordinator. Because almost always there's need for some kind of help. Another adult in the room is probably not a bad idea to most youth ministries. Well, that could be you. And it doesn't mean you're going to come in right away and teach apologetics, or teach Christian case maker, or teach theology, or teach any of these things. But you're going to volunteer and develop deep relationships with the students who have questions. And at some point, you're going to get a chance to lead somebody to truth. But how do you do that? When they seem so different than us. And what I mean by that, it's every generation seems different than the generation before, but this generation is even more different based on the technology which was not there just one generation ago. Smartphone technology, the information age, has changed the playing field for young people. I want to give you today some tips that'll help you to teach them. Now, this all comes from a website on a webpage on our website that is titled the same way, Tips for Teaching Christian Truth to Gen Z. And it's in our blog section, our articles section, under the category for youth. We've got a ton of youth and parenting articles. Also, you'll find videos in a separate section, podcasts in a separate section. Please visit our website and you'll be able to download this. And by the way, when you download it, it comes out as a PDF file without any of the headers or sidebars or any of that information that's extra. It just has the article with the title on the top. That is what you get when you download something on our website. We've designed it that way so you can take every single piece of data from our website and take it with you. Download it, share it, send it to somebody, print it, use it in your small group, use it in your family, whatever it does to bless you, we hope you're doing that. Now, I want to give you a few techniques that you can use with your kids. And you may have a sense that, you know what, it's important to teach this, and it's not like, you might even know what to teach. You might even say, I know what theology, I'm good with that. I understand biblical orthodoxy. I understand how to defend my faith. You might have mastered all those things and still wonder, oh yeah, but how do I communicate it in a way that's relevant to this generation? Is that different than how I might communicate it to others? I actually think it is. So I want to give you some tips that'll help you do a better job at this. Here's the first one. The first one is simply this. You've got to be persistent. Persistent. Be persistent. Now, I think we learned this as first responders when it comes to training, because over the last, say 30 years, and my son's going through this now, my dad went through it before me, we would be in a career for 25 to 30 years and go into training 2-3 times a year. Training for this or that, defensive tactics, handcuffing techniques, pursuit driving, whatever it is, some report writing, whatever it may be, we would constantly have to revisit our training. And do you realize that in all that training, we never really did anything new? It was just the same old stuff done over and over and over again. So it was helpful because, let's face it, it's about developing muscle memory. We talk about this a lot. Muscle memory. I don't have to think, I just respond. Now, if you are leading young people in your family or in a youth group or in a Christian school, it's going to take more than just one cycle around on an issue to ingrain this in the lives of your students. You might be talking about this particular issue and you think to yourself, well, I already covered that last year. Well, if you're a youth pastor, a good chance half those kids who are in your youth pastorate today weren't even here last year. So you're going to have to cover it again. And also, don't be afraid to cover the same thing, maybe a slightly different angle or a slightly different fresh look, but the same topics over and over and over again with your kids, with your students, with your pupils, because in the end, they need to hear it again and again and again so it'll be ingrained. Again, we did not train anything new. We would just do the stuff we started off doing in the academy. We'd do it every year or two over and over and over again for 30 years because we're simply trying to make it muscle memory. So be persistent in whatever it is you are teaching young people. Don't assume that if I covered it once, I've covered it. Even in a family where you think, well, yeah, but it was me and it was my son or it was my daughter. Just last year we talked about this. I have discovered as my kids got older, we'd be having conversations while they're in their early 20s, and I would realize, well, again, we covered that when you were a teenager, but they've either forgotten or that day they were checked out and they weren't paying attention. Whatever it may be persistent. Let me give you another tip that I think will help you, and that is you need to be humble. Be humble. Here's what I mean by that. My co-author, Sean McDowell, we wrote a book together called So the Next Generation Will Know. That's a good place to get all this data. As a matter of fact, this talk I'm giving you today is just an abbreviated excerpt from that book. But in order to actually have the expertise to write that book, we got to study, we got to employ, we got to do these things that we've learned. We got to actually put them into action. And a lot of apologists will study for some season of years before they ever. But I'll tell you what I've learned. As much as I know very little. And it's always going to be that way because the depth of knowledge in any particular area is going to be much deeper than probably any one human can plumb in his entire lifetime or her entire lifetime. So I think we want to be humble. And one thing that's respected by this generation, Gen Z, and almost every survey that's done of Gen Z, is a sense of authenticity in which you are humble in your approach. I try to be less dogmatic and more open-handed, especially on those views that might divide the church. Right? There are certain areas of theology where we're not quite sure which way to go. There's debating theories about certain forms of certain aspects of our orthodox positions. Some are quite clear, those we would call the essentials. But amongst the non-essentials, there's lots of debate. Well, I'm humble in the way I approach this. I'm not dogmatic. I want to be humble enough, for example, to simply listen to the young people I'm trying to train. So I want to encourage you, as you do this, to be humble. There are people who know more about a topic than you do. There are people that your young people probably know much more about culture than you do. I want to teach and learn simultaneously. That view of authenticity and humble nature, humility, I think goes a long way with this generation. So 2 things we've talked about so far. Number 1, be persistent. And number 2, be humble. Let's come back after the break. I'll give you a few more. I'm a Californian. And if you ask me, well, how do I make that claim? I'll just tell you I was born and raised in California. But if you ask me the difficult questions about, when was California established, or how many counties are in California, or what's the California state bird or state tree, or how do you pass a law in California? Well, you'd find out pretty quickly that I'm a pretty crummy Californian. I think at times in the church, those of us who call ourselves Christians are kind of Christians the way I'm a Californian. We were born and raised here, and you couldn't deny the fact we are Christians, but don't ask us too many important questions. Most of my life, I've been a pretty committed atheist, and at 35, I started to take a really hard look at whether or not the scripture was telling me the truth about Jesus. And I worked as a detective, and I was working on a surveillance team at the time, and I had friends that were cops, and they wanted me to become a Christian, and they shared what they believed with me. And I discovered pretty quickly that these folks in their professional lives were incredibly evidential and rational and thoughtful case makers. They could give you 5 reasons why that bad guy we're working is responsible for those robberies. But if I asked them for 5 reasons why I could trust the Bible, suddenly it took an entirely different approach
to their large picture, big metaphysical picture. The claims of Christianity they couldn't answer the same way they could answer whether or not that guy is our robbery suspect. And I thought to myself, really? You want me as an atheist to jump from this kind of rational view of the world where I can make cases evidentially into a way of living in which I can't even use evidence? I don't even think of things that way anymore? I can't do it. I can't turn my brain off in order to join you. A number of years ago, I got called out to an officer-involved shooting scene. I was working on my homicide team, and sure enough, we have to investigate officer-involved shootings too. And when I got there, the officer explained to me how he got into a gun battle. He said he pulled over a car for drunk driving. And as he walked up in the car, he could smell alcohol coming out of the window. So he asked the driver of the car to get out of the car to do what he calls an FST. We all call it that. It's his field sobriety test. And as soon as the gentleman got out of the car, he wanted to conduct a routine pat-down search before he started the FST, just to make sure this guy's not carrying any weapons. But this guy was carrying a weapon. As a matter of fact, he had a .45 caliber handgun in his waistband underneath his shirt. This guy had just been released from jail for an assault. Now, as a parolee, he had a gun in his waistband. The officer, not knowing this, told him to turn around and face away from him so he could start the pat-down. The suspect in this case decided to make a decision. He knew that if he was caught with the gun in his waistband, he would do a year in jail, just for possession of the gun. So he had to make a decision that night about whether he was going to go back to jail for a year or kill the officer. So he turned around after facing away from the officer and turned around and faced the officer, only about maybe 5 feet apart, and he pointed his handgun directly at the officer. The officer was completely off guard. As a matter of fact, he didn't even have his own hand on his gun, as now he's facing down the barrel of the suspect's gun. But he was wearing his bulletproof vest. So he stood there and he decided, given all my options, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to trust my vest, and I'm going to tense up my stomach muscles, and I'm going to take the first couple of rounds while I get ready to return fire. Now think about that for a second. Once you know that the vest can stop rounds, and if you know that the vest can stop rounds, you're far more likely to stand tall in that vest in a point of challenge. So here's my question for you. Do you know enough about your Christian worldview to know that it can stop bullets? Have you tested it? Have you allowed the bullets to hit the vest? Have you listened to the objections of atheists? Have you listened to the objections of those who don't believe Christianity is true? And are you prepared with the answer? Confidence is not free. Confidence comes at the end of an intellectual investigation that requires an intellectually robust form of Christianity. Yes, you might hold that Christianity is true today accidentally. You don't even know why it's true. But you don't have to hold it that way. I think there are people out there who are unbelievers, who think that if only Christians would be exposed to the evidence, they would no longer be Christians. What if that's wrong? What if, in fact, the more you're exposed to the evidence, the more confident you would be in your Christian worldview? Look, I make no apology about being a Christian because I know I can dig as deep as I want into the evidence, and I'm not going to scare myself away from what I believe. I'm going to become more certain of what I believe. Don't be afraid to dig deep into the evidence because you'll have the same kind of confidence as a result of that investigation.
Okay, let me give you a couple more tips that'll help you teach the youngest generation in the church, which we typically say is the most important generation in the church, because they are the most important generation in the church if you care about the future of the church. We talked about being persistent and humble. Now I want to give you a third principle. I want you to be understated in how you approach this. Look, let me kind of illustrate this from my criminal trials. I know that at the end of a criminal trial, the jury is still going to have a number of unanswered questions. And I don't pretend, and never do I state to the jury that I'm going to be able to remove all those unanswered questions. I could overstate the evidence, but if I do, and they find out just one place they sense I've overstated the evidence, then they're going to wonder if I've overstated it everywhere. So I don't overstate the evidence. There's enough evidence to infer that Christianity is true. And there's also enough lack of evidence that some people are going to reject it. This is why two people will look at the same evidence, and for any number of biases or reasons, they will find it lacking or find it proving. We have to be understated, though, with how much we can demonstrate, given the antiquity of the claims and the supernatural nature of the claims. That's why I never use this word, I'm going to prove it to you. No, I'm going to show you why the evidence was compelling for me, why it should be compelling for you, why it would be compelling for a jury. But the proof is really in the mind of the person who's evaluating. I could give you 10 pieces of evidence. You might say, that proved it to me. But somebody else might say, I need a little more. Or I was actually convinced 3 evidences ago. So that really the person who's evaluating gets to decide if my case proves anything. Make sense? So what I want to do when I'm working with young people is to be as understated as I can be. I want them to recognize that I have a certain amount of humility. Remember we talked about being humble. A certain amount of evidential humility. I know that I can only demonstrate so much. In a criminal trial, I don't have a video recording of the entire murder in which I can just flip it on and play and no, they were done. There's no questions left, no questions left unanswered. It doesn't work that way. I'm going to have to get you to beyond a reasonable doubt, not beyond a possible doubt. And that difference, understanding the difference between these two things is critical. I want to understate the case, or at least tell them, here's as far as I think the case can take you, and now the rest is how you infer from the evidence. I think that is a level of authenticity as well that young people actually embrace and think is actually quite helpful. So, as you're making the case, be a little less dogmatic and help them to see that although I can't answer all your questions, no worldview can answer all your questions. As an atheist, I think I actually had more unanswered questions than I have as a theist. I had questions about the origin of the universe, the appearance of fine-tuning in the universe, the origin of life in the universe, the appearance of design in biology, how you get mind and unconscious and conscious immaterial existence from an entirely material universe. How do you have free agency if we're in a material universe that everything is dictated by physical law? How do we have an objective moral code if everything's just a matter of personal opinion or cultural consensus? And are there objective moral? I think there are objective moral codes. How do I explain those? How do I even establish a level of righteousness, a standard of righteousness that I can use to measure something and call it evil? Look, I had a lot of open questions. And I just was comfortable with those. And I still inferred, at that point, now look, did I know everything there was to know about the Christian worldview? No. I think our young people need to know that if I can show you everything there is to know about the Christian worldview, even though you'll have open questions, you'll still end up on the Christian side because you have fewer unanswered questions than you would if you were on the atheist side. But I try to be understated in the way I present that evidence. Now, fourth thing, being understated, being humble, being all those things are good. But here's what I want you to really lay into, and you got to be practical. I mean practical. What I mean is, I want you to employ these. Don't leave these as highly theoretical concepts. Don't leave these as abstract ideas. Or I think when people have to put the rubber to the road, it starts to come to life for them. So I try to be incredibly practical. And what that means is I either need to put my students in a place where they're going to have these kinds of conversations. We've talked a lot about that. As a matter of fact, you can find another episode of our podcast. Remember, they're all archived on our YouTube page. They're all archived so you can see all the other pages, all the other videos you might have missed. You'll see that we have talked about how to put challenges in front of your kids to make this practical. But if nothing else, I will sometimes have them role play in my what if somebody said this to you? What would you say? Maybe you'll have a role play. Somebody who comes and tries to, say, tempt them with something. How do you respond to temptation? Someone comes and levels a claim of skepticism. How do you respond to doubt, to skepticism? I mean, I want to actually have them role play this. What would you say if I said this? And then role play back. And it's always better if you can have two students role-playing with each other rather than you as the old guy doing the role-playing. But I think role-playing is a critical feature because it puts the rubber to the road. It actually makes this come to life. This is why whenever we start training young people, we usually begin by preparing a test, a role play in which we are introduced as something other than who we are, as somebody who is the local professor. If they already know me and I can't get away with that, I'll bring in my son, and my son will role play as an ex-Christian who used to be in my youth group who now does not believe Christianity is true. Making this practical, making it real through action is a great way to teach truth to Gen Z. All right, we'll take a break. I'll come and give you 2 more ways to help grow your students in their confidence and mature them as you teach them Christian truth.
Jay Warner and Susie Wallace have written 3 kids' books to help children know the truth and defend it in the public square. All 3 books mirror Jay Warner's adult books, chapter by chapter. And best yet, the kids' books are written as fictional stories that will turn your kids into detectives as they solve mysteries and learn about Christianity. There's also an interactive academy website at casemakersacademy.com where your kids can join other cadets and complete their own academy notebook. Each course has free videos, activity sheets, and more. Your young readers can even earn their own junior detective graduation certificates and appear on the Honor Cadet Wall. Be sure to visit casemakersacademy.com to learn more. In addition to Jim's daily blog and weekly podcasts and videos, Jim continues to write books designed to help you become a better Christian casemaker. At coldcasechristianity.com, you'll find a link to Cold Case Christianity, God's Crime Scene, Forensic Faith, and Alive. These resources will help you defend what you believe and share it with others. And if you want to help your kids become Christian casemakers, be sure to check out the kids' versions of Jay Warner's books.
Okay, 2 more ways that I think are specific to Gen Z and also general enough for you to see. You probably had an experience. For example, the first one I want to give you, you probably had an experience that will tell you this is true, and that's this. You need to be personal and contextual about the way you teach young people. Personal and contextual. Here's what I mean by that. How many times have you been involved in a Bible study, a Christian study of any kind, in which you have, along with other people, used curriculum from some... Look, I've got 4 different sets of curriculum on Right Now Media and available on Amazon Prime Video and also available to purchase as DVDs. But you know what? Although I created those, they aren't going to be personal and contextual to your setting. In other words, if you're facilitating those small groups, you're going to have to watch that material up front and then figure out a way to use it in the context of your group, preparing for the kinds of questions they're going to answer. It's going to look different for every group. If you think there's any plug-and-play curriculum that you can just go out there, or you got a message maybe you saw on somebody else's website, I can just cut and paste that into my message on Sunday. Good luck with that, because your group is different than the group that I gave that to. And you're going to have to learn how to personalize all this. I tell you, I always tell people, you purchase curriculum to give you the starting point from which you personalize and contextualize. The work isn't done by buying curriculum, the work begins, but at least you've got a nice outline. And you might look in that facilitator's guide and you might look in that participant's guide and go, we're not doing B, because B does not work for this group. They're not going to understand that, they're not going to like that, whatever. You cut and paste once you get the baseline. But this is especially true for Gen Z. This is a group that you need to think about your group. You know your kids in your family. You know your kids in what their attention span is. You might just, I've got videos, for example, posted online on my YouTube page at Right Now Media that are anywhere from 2 minutes to 12 minutes that will teach sometimes the same kind of material. Well, you're going to have to find the one that works best for you if you're going to play that. In a small group, sometimes you can play a 12-minute video, it's no problem. You only got 5 or 6 people or 10 people, and there's no. But if you're trying to teach 40, good luck keeping their attention. I remember Sean, who I wrote the book with, would have me occasionally come in and substitute in his class in high school. My daughter was also in that high school. So I love doing it. So I would come in, but he would sometimes say, hey, you can just play this, True You video. It's like a curriculum that's out there for students. If you're a substitute teacher and you're trying to play a 20-minute video, even a 10-minute video, what do you think is going to happen in that classroom? No one's paying attention. They're just talking to each other, passing notes. I have to actually learn the material in that video so I can teach it personally and remain connected with eye contact, with stories that I know will appeal to this group, maybe even talk about some of the things I know they've experienced. I have to personalize it. I have to contextualize it. I can't just play the video. Same is true for you. There is no book you can give, DVD course you can give, that's going to have the magic sauce of your personal relationship in the context of your kids knowing what you know about them. Personalize and contextualize. And let me give you one last thing. For me, it has personally been the most important thing. Here it is. You need to be visual with Gen Z. This is the first identified entirely digital native generation. In other words, you and I, we got a smartphone when we were older. My kids who are millennials got a smartphone when they were in the last year of high school, I think. That's when the technology was available. Now, this generation starts off with it at birth, either in the hands of their parents, the hands of their older siblings, or in their hands themselves. And what makes them digital is the highly visual nature of phones. It's not that phones, you upgrade your phone for one reason: screen quality, camera quality, visual. You don't care about anything else. Those are the two things you care about, because we are turning digital natives into visual natives. These people speak a language called visualish. I call it visualish. And what it is when I speak, I'm writing another book right now. And the book I'm writing it in Photoshop and PowerPoint, creating media, because I know once all the media presentation is done, I've created it visually, I'll be able to turn it into words. If I do words first, the media, visual media, won't be anything that's all that great. I'm not trying to stick images after I've written words. I'm trying to think visually and then speak a language called visualish to young people. It's sometimes for you, if you're a teacher or you're a pastor or you're a parent, it's about you like using word pictures. Like Jesus did this, right? These parables were word pictures in which he simply tried to make you visualize a story. You can see the parable in your head as he's explaining it. Stories help us do that. Object lessons, visual objects. This theological principle is like this visual piece of equipment. These are called object lessons. You use a visual object to tell the lesson. Start looking for opportunities to leverage visual language when creating and trying to talk about spiritual issues. Jesus did this by using word pictures. He even used object lessons, pointing to a tree, pointing to that mountain, pointing to this mustard seed. Whatever it was, visual objects will help you to make the case with Gen Z. This is particularly important to this generation because of digital media. And I will tell you that I had a leg up on this because I had a degree in graphic design, and I was using this as a youth pastor with young people, and it was quite effective. And then I learned how to use it in front of juries. Visual media makes all the difference. So let me encourage you to take these steps and to make sure as you're doing them that you are using visual media and using visual language, a visual approach with young people. You'll see that difference makes all the difference. I hope these tips have kind of helped you to think about how you might communicate more clearly and teach Christian truth to young people. We'll see you right back here next week at Cold Case Christianity.
Thanks for joining us at the Cold Case Christianity broadcast. If you're interested in more information about this week's topic, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. For a thorough investigation of the reliability of the New Testament Gospels and the case for Christianity, be sure to purchase Cold Case Christianity, God's Crime Scene, Forensic Faith, and Alive.